Good day, good evening to all of you, our participants. Welcome to the keynote address of the second ALTERSEA Conference 2022 with the theme Engaging Research, Exploring Collaborations Between Researchers, Activists, and Citizens. My name is Marichi Castro Guevara. I teach at the Ateneo de Manila University, and I'm also a research associate of the Institute of Philippine Culture. This session is hosted by the Institute of Philippine Culture, IPC, Ateneo de Manila University. Before we begin, here are some house rules for the webinar. First, if you encounter connection problems during the webinar, you may exit the session and click the Zoom link sent to your email when you registered for the event. Second, for easy identification and smooth entry into the session, please indicate your full name on Zoom. Third, please use the chat box on the right side of your screen for comments and questions related to the presentations. We will have an open forum after the keynote address and the response of the discussant. We value respect and courtesy the most during our conference sessions. This session is held in partnership with the Institute of Philippine Culture, or IPC. The IPC is a social science research organization of the School of Social Sciences of the Loyola Schools of the Ateneo de Manila University. Founded in 1960, the IPC seeks a better understanding of culture and society in the Philippines and other Asian countries, an improved quality of life for disadvantaged groups, and a more peaceful, just, and equitable national and global society. We hope that the past 3 days of the conference have been very fruitful and filled with learning for our paper presenters and participants alike. For this session, a very special one, we will continue to discuss the importance of engaged research. We will continue to ask ourselves the important questions of why we conduct engaged research and how to do so. We will begin our session with a keynote presentation, followed by a discussion and response. After both presentations, we will move to the open forum. Please use the chat box to raise and give your questions. So now it is my honor and pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker. Mary Racelis is a research scientist at the Institute of Philippine Culture of the School of Social Sciences at Ateneo de Manila University and its former director. She teaches at the Ateneo's Department of Sociology and Anthropology and at the Department of Anthropology of the University of the Philippines, with her most recent courses being Engaged Anthropology and the Anthropology of Justice and Human Rights. Mary served as UNICEF's Senior Advisor for Women's Development, Community Participation, and Family Development, Family Child Welfare in New York from 1979 to 1983, before becoming the UNICEF Regional Director of Eastern and Southern Africa in Nairobi, Kenya from 1983 to 1992. She returned to the Philippines as the country director of the Ford Foundation and in 2000 to Ateneo as IPC director until 2003. At the invitation of former Secretary General Kofi Annan, she became an active member in 2003 to 2004 of his panel of eminent persons on United Nations civil society relations. Of note are her continuing activities with NGOs and organized urban poor people's organizations. Mary's research has focused on urban informal settlements, community organizing, gender, children, reproductive health, and sociocultural change, largely in the context of human rights. She is a strong advocate of knowledge generation as co-production, co-implementation, co-ownership, and co-benefits with people through community research partnerships. As her former student, Trixie is also her former student, and Nin Sapalo, we know that very well. Uh, Let us now give a warm virtual welcome to Professor Mary Racelis.
Thank you very much, Marichi, and my former students who are wonderfully now my colleagues. It's so great to see young people from the medium and immediate past as my peers. So today I was asked to do the plenary, and when I was thinking about what to say, I thought I should bring out many of the issues that came out over the last 3 days. So can we go to the next slide for a short outline of what I hope to do? First, I think we have to look at social movements and what that means today. And then based on the key examples raised in the conference, and we can just go through those quickly, make a commentary on what's the significance of what we have learned about that, moving into the alternative approaches that I think all of the participants of this conference have been moving toward or already actively promoting regarding knowledge generation as a co-process with the people who we used to say we're doing research about, but now we say we research with, supporting their needs for information and knowledge to pursue their particular interests. At least that's our goal. And finally, maybe suggesting a possible agenda for ALTERSEA in the next few years, which of course is a very open-ended discussion, with hopefully for the Q&A and any other comments. So next, so let's go to social movements. Now we all know that we hate definitions, but they're kind of common characteristics for what we've always thought of as social movements. Groups who mobilize around a common goal, either resisting, confronting, interrogating current paradigms of power to press for reform and significant change, social change. And especially in our context, to demand new alternative outlooks and affirm people's rights. Right? So at the same time, I think almost everybody here we're talking about avoiding the groups that try to avoid violence. And so resisting people usually try to avoid violence, but keep that possibility open if it becomes necessary because of recalcitrant those in authority. So we need to reconceptualize social movements at the very least, because now we're talking about Southeast Asia, and we're talking about individual countries in Southeast Asia, and we're talking about actual communities or particular groups in community settings in the society. So that gives us another perspective on social movements and how people are operating on the ground. How are people thinking and acting? But the second part of that is that there is now the whole world of social media, which has added tremendous possibilities, threats also, but this is what some of you have come to grips with. And I'm very glad my colleague Noreen is here, because that is very much her specialty. And as a younger generation, and everybody's a younger generation than me, she, I hope, will develop that part of it more significantly. So next. What were some of the key points? Let's go. Not all of you may not have attended all the sessions, so let me just go quickly. We had components, well, education of girls and young women, environmental education, digital technology used for supporting, organizing, development, indigenous people, the credit union example, LGBT trans women, women's organizations. The soccer fan group was particularly interesting there. Counter-liberal movements, the without dating one was a very interesting variation. We talked about anti-corruption, and we had a very strong advocate for what you can do to make corruption a very more public issue that people sees. Next. All right, and there was decolonizing research. There was the student press, the strength of student journalism and the threats to them too. Street art as also semi-resistant, expressing concerns of those who are involved in it. The involvement of religious and faith-based groups, prisoners also, migrants, internally displaced people, urban subaltern, the issues like surplus value and this interesting term, the cognitariat, that is academics who in a way make a business of what they earn. They're kind of the surplus value, as the person who presented it put it. So looking at ourselves as academics in another light. We all think we're trying to do something useful and respectfully, but we have to recognize that our positionality is really part of the problem and maybe the solution. Next. So what is this concept, co-knowledge generation? Let's interrogate it a little, explore it. We're talking about co-creation, co-production, that is with people who have a set of issues that hope that they want to, that they are addressing, and we as academics can come in with them at their request, or hopefully they with their support, certainly invitation, to work, to journey with them on in their whatever they're struggling for. So the notion of co-creation, co-production, co-ownership, I think co-benefits also with what I call the core community, the people's community, that is the group that who has to be making the decisions, and with the academics as interacting, right? So the core group is the community, or the whatever marginalized group, or the group that has an issue that they want to address because of usually a differentials in power relations, where they're in the weaker part, except when they organize, that's how they get power. So there are other local support groups besides academics. There should be more academics, but there's a very solid core, and many of them are reflected in this conference. But there are also NGOs, faith-based groups, political groups who also are involved. Next. There's a local opposition. When you talk about community, we all know that doesn't mean everybody's in agreement, that there are always factions, disagreement, different interests, and the organizers, if they're trying to move forward with some strengths, have to resolve some of those differences, but there will always be those in opposition. And academics have to be recognized that if you locate yourself too squarely in one, quote, faction, you may lose data or the trust of the other side. Again, there's something always that has to be thought about. Right? And there are always people who are detached. They don't want to get involved, even in the community. We have to deal with government, national and local. There's business when they're doing reclamation in fishing villages, for example. And then there's the whole public who we feel need to be more understanding and involved. And now with social media, that becomes much more possible than before. There are also the global players. There, as you already know. I just wanted to add, bring to the table that really in many of these resistance movements, which are community-based especially, it's women who are taking the lead. It's not that men are not. They're supposed to be finding work, working in something systematic. So the women take up the slack, which in in communities is really their life, because they're there. And when they learn how to, or when they begin to take on leadership roles and get the confidence because there's really an issue, their groups want them to take the lead, organizers train them how you lead, and so on, they become a very powerful force. And this is true for urban communities. You see it in Latin America, you see it in Africa, and how they deal with the men is also very strategic. Women are pretty smart at how to handle men, right? All right, next. So there's also the people said, let's focus on methodology. It's all very well to say all the codes, but what do you actually do? You have to be aware of rights and the process also. That the commitment that communities define the problem, communities, or the affected groups frame the problem. This is what I consider the difference between what we always called participatory action research. That was born out of the recognition in development circles that bringing in an idea from outside, whether it's to improve people's health, children's nutrition, while noble, if you don't involve the people in it, then it's not going to work or sustain. The difference between par and the co notion, is you don't go in with a topic already. You may have an interest, you may know some of the issues that probably are important, but you don't make that decision. It's really the community or the affected group that has to make that decision. And they frame the problem, right? They know who the stakeholders are, what is the issue to be researched. So the whole process, preparation, implementation, analysis, conclusion, they're there. Now, at the beginning, when they haven't done this before, they feel very insecure. And if they trust you, they will look to you for advice. But you have to build that trust. And how do you do that? You're there. You walk the talk. This is not an in and out kind of thing. You are part of their process as much as possible. That's not always easy, considering that we're teaching or working somewhere. But that dimension of building trust, so they know that you're, quote, on their side, even as they recognize that you have your own set of responsibilities. And if they trust you, they will respect that, right? Then evaluating the process, the results, what's considered success for them. Often at the beginning, if you're going to do real research, you ask them, what would you see as the desirable outcome of all of this? And then at the end, and they say that, and at the end, you see, did it get achieved? That's a simple evaluation criteria at the beginning, and then your review at the end. Multidisciplinarity becomes essential because people live a holistic life. What might be a child nutrition problem or under fives not being fed enough and therefore having brain development problems is related to poverty, women's access to reproductive health care or any care, and so on, power dynamics in the community. So multidisciplinarity becomes really crucial because people's lives are holistic, and we are just one piece of this. If we bring in also, as necessary, I love to have philosophers in now. I'll be bringing even theologians in our case because of people's spiritual concerns, right? Oh, wait, hold on. I think I have to plug my battery. Sorry. Okay, next. All right. So what are some of the ethical issues that were raised already in very intricately here in this session? But let me just summarize, I think, some of the main things. What are the rights of the affected, involved people, where the disadvantaged, the communities, the subaltern, right? All the people that we want, whose lives we hope we can help improve in the ways they see as fit. Actually, this is pretty much the same as before. There's ethical issues in identifying, framing the problem, developing the research tools, gathering the data, and so on. I think we did that, right? Establishing the data ownership. That has to be clear from the beginning. The data are theirs, but you hope that you can agree, that they will agree that you share the data, because co means you share. They know you're not doing this. Well, I don't know if they know, but you get across it. You want to be of assistance, but you're an academic and you do have to publish or you do have to give talks, and you don't want to represent them, but you can at least say things that would make their situation improve somehow. Let's say if you talk to the National Housing Authority, et cetera, about whether they can really afford it or not, what the payments for the housing, let's say. So it's important to clarify all of these questions in a way beforehand, at least bring it out at the beginning, so that you don't get to the end and they say, what do you mean you're going to write this up? Wait a minute. Or the other way around, you assume that you're going to write it, but they're not sure whether you should, and so on. So that issue of ownership, who decides or how will the data be used, is important. And of course, feeding it back to the community in ways that they can understand, together with the research partners of the community, is very important. Next. Positionality came up a lot, and academic, what are our quandaries as academic? Positionality. That is, where are you individually in this whole thing. Every individual has a different reason why they're there in that particular community. And I think we all have to analyze ourselves. To what extent are we very partial, or what are we, questioning what they're doing, or will we stand up to them? Will you march, or if they're going to mobilize and march to the president's palace, are you going to walk with them? Will they expect you to walk with them? Will that be good for them or not? And many of these issues arise. So positionality actually changes as you continue to interact with them. So it's a constant reflection. Where am I? And as some of the panelists earlier said, am I at least doing no harm? That is very basic. I may be acting in certain ways, hopefully with people's agreement, but certainly do no harm. Why? Because even though you're a national of the country, you can leave that community and go back to your house. They cannot, they're there. And so the security issue is crucial, not only for yourself, but for them in how you deal with, how you disseminate the data. As one of our panelists said, it took her 20 years before she would do it, because her research clearly would identify, even if the names were not there, everybody who knows that community knows exactly who's been referred to. So she could not publish, and she would not publish ethically herself. She decided that for 20 years when the issue was now somewhat in the background. And these are issues that you don't think about maybe at the beginning, but you have to confront them as they come. We're all faced with the social science research norms, unbiased evidence. And of course, there are people who say that evidence is never unbiased. It's never really neutral. You take a position, you're implicitly in some kind of position when you start a research project, because there is some kind of framework. But if you're connected with communities, then you can say, yes, it's a bias, but your responsibility always as a social scientist is really to be able also to stand back and not betray the other norm, which is evidence-based, as unbiased as possible. At the same time, you become an advocate. If you really care, if you are involved in many of these groups, you really get angry at the injustice that they go through day after day. As some of the participants probably took 10 years, 5 years, 10 years before a simple request for, I don't know, a piece of land or a space was finally agreed on through all the institutional maneuverings. And you get angry at that, if you see, because it's so unfair. And yet it's their issue, it's their problem. You have to stand back. You cannot be the champion of them unless they want you to be. You can act in different ways. All right. So, however, university or institutional structures and processes often affect how much we can really be engaged in the ways we want, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We also have to learn, in my view, not only how to do academic writing, which we usually learn how to do, but popular writing, advocacy writing, that people will understand. And you write for the newspapers, write for the, in our case, Rappler, for example, popular media forms, write in responsible ways where you bring out the evidence that you have, which is very compelling to show people's sides, but in ways which are understandable, not jargony. And so that's very difficult for people who've been steeped in academic writing. I found that out from my grad students. They find the first time around, I told them your final exam is to write up your academic report in a popularized way for publication in a local newspaper. The results were terrible. And because they didn't know how to do it. So it's something that they have to learn also. And if you want to advocate, then you do have to learn it. Recognize status differences, always. These often poor people, powerless for many years, they're not sure they can really make a difference in the world, but you come in there and you want to be you're really equal in your perspective, but you know a lot more than they do. The thing is, they know a lot more than you do also. So we accept the balance, but they themselves, if they say, oh, I'm only grade 2 and you're in a university. And so you have to somehow make sure that it doesn't matter, you know, the status differences don't matter because you have a common problem and you each can solve it in different ways. The security, I think we've already talked about that. Next. Again, academic quandaries, a grasp of the broader social and global context and people's knowledge. I have a very nice quote from Professor Gieb, who was a keynote speaker at last week's Anthropological Society meeting. And I like this one. He says, his concluding line was, the small, the little, the shallow, the local are indeed huge, big, deep, and global. So that's what we do now as social scientists. We work with communities, but we're very aware of the larger, not only regional and national context, but that the global, especially the neoliberal market economy is having a very strong effect, even on small communities, right? But it's always different how that is. So you have to have a grasp of it. And somehow, if it's significant for the community, you have to be able to explain it in ways in their language, preferably, that they will comprehend that, you know. All right, then there's also envisioning a moral public. There are some of our speakers who talked about the importance of kind of getting the public to rethink its priorities and its morality. You know, what does it feel about people who are disadvantaged in so many ways, and being able to do something about it, willingness to do something about it. We're also talking about the shared and redistributive economy versus the neoliberal profit-dominant market, the reality of state power and authoritarian governments. But in the end, for many of us, it's a very personal thing. How far can we go without not being any more social scientists? But we're not NGOs, you know, we're not that's not our strength. So always trying, the positionality is always there. Next. So turning to social media as support and as undermining, and I hope that Nin Sapalo can expand on this. It does provide options for the kinds of alternative research we're now talking about, a kind of committed to defend or to bring out the voices of the disadvantaged groups, the marginalized, to get them on the table, even if it's a virtual table, because that's where now action is very much centered. And the advantage, youth, of course, have a special advantage. And that's why I'm so delighted in this conference. There are so many young people, some of your students, whether it's PhD or master's or college, very impressive, because that's the generation, that's your generation. You and the younger ones are what they call media natives or something, you know, that it's so easy for you to figure out how to maneuver in this social media world, that world is where you're going to make a big difference if you can figure out how to connect social movements with grounded involvements to the social, to networks, right? We do have to deal with troll farms, fake news, because we're trying to promote a certain set of what we call we think are truthful, accurate, and yet are maybe attacked from the other side by troll farmers or and that's all in the power domain, of course, of the society. We have to know who are the influencers, usually and more supported by authoritarian governments, which is why social media becomes even more important. Fight against its being taken over by influencers who are being paid by authoritarian governments to do troll farming, fake news development, and so on. So how do we, as an entity, academics with special knowledge and connections on the ground, how do we parlay that into becoming a very positive and dynamic force online? And you know how global systems work, Facebook, Mega, Instagram, TikTok, others, right? But we're also looking at who generates these global systems and what kind of accountability do they have, right? Next. So what now for alternative researchers? I think we call ourselves, or you can call, as some call yourselves, citizen, academic activists, citizen scientists, are the people on the ground. Here, local researchers, people's organizations. Those are the people who should be in the forefront. But we see ourselves as activists, academics, with partner support groups, technical people, faith-based, and so on. Next. I mean, this is a whole new dimension for us as alternative researchers. Next. All right, so suggestions: champion the validity, strengths, and rights of affected people to decide on their preferred research framework, informational framework. Research is a little bit scary for people who are not used to that term. They think that's only academics who do it. But I prefer to say information. What kind of information do you need, to help you do this? All right, research framework and their involvement in the entire co-knowledgement generation process. Recognize academics' responsibility to their local research partners. That means listen to and learn from local people, establish trust, develop interactive peer relationships, commit to long-term involvement, and I guess assist in the process of knowledge generation with them. Add whatever your technical expertise. I hate to use expertise because they're expert in their field, but their technical knowledge. Next. Okay, bring in technical and financial support as needed. Some of the researchers here in this conference made that point, that's one of the important things that the community really wants you to do, that you bring in, because it's not, they're fighting a dam construction. They don't know the engineering dimensions of that. You bring in your friend engineers, talk to them, tell them what it is, so they have data to explain to the Department of Environment why they cannot sign an agreement that dam should go ahead. So we need that and we know that we're in the middle, right? We have contacts with all kinds of knowledge producing people in academia. So we have government contacts, and that's important because often it's government in the end that decides. And many of us have friends because we operate in those circles, and we can be very significant in influencing them to listen to people, bring them together. And I have done that. We have done it many times, and you see, it's like scales drop from their eyes when they listen. They go to communities, they listen to why people will not move, and they see, that they make a lot of sense. They're just trying to protect their families because of their livelihoods. And that transition from them becomes tremendously significant when they operate in something like the Department of Public Highways, which tends to evict people all the time. So advocate local people's interests without representing them. And sometimes it's a hard line, it's a hard boundary to fit, but you have to have that boundary. Establishing support systems in the social media, I'll leave that to Neen. Develop and participate in networks and alliances of alternative researchers. And this conference has been a marvelous expression of that. Next. Okay, we're nearly at the end. So we have to reform academic university structures to support the co-knowledge generation modes. We have to call for review the recruitment, the criteria for recruitment, promotion, tenure, and incentives. That the work we do, working with communities, counts, and it should be shown in these processes, which are university processes that involve us all. Teach co-generation modes and expose students to field situations, promote multidisciplinarity, reorient writing styles, academic and popular, ensure use of local languages for research feedback and local publications. We find especially the hard scientists are the ones who seem to have the most difficulty, even though they're nationals of the country. And that's many of our social scientists also. We're so used to working in English, at least in the Philippines, for serious, conferences abroad, of course, with other nationalities, that we don't develop our skills in restating what we know technically so that people understand. our language, right? That the language should be their language, but with the technical inputs. Challenge the global criteria for university rankings. All of us are now Scopus publication in English, right? Um, there's room for that, no, but we're saying there has to be, universities have to be much more flexible to recognize the value of publications. Well, maybe other countries in Asia don't have this problem as much as the Philippines, right? But publishing in local languages becomes very important. Not publishing, but writing or having videos for them to explain the question in with local language. Going with it makes a huge difference for people's knowledge. All right, and but we're all trying. I like the Sustainable Development Goals. The government has adopted that. It's an easy way of forcing, social change, sort of. But to be always stuck with this framework when there's so many other frameworks one could develop. But universities love this because it's universal, it's UN, it's worldwide, and they can all compare themselves, which is, because of rankings, they want to be as far to number one as possible. This becomes an important element. And if you're in faculty, of course, you have to support it. But at the same time, we have to be flexible and show that there are other kinds of ways of handling criteria vis-a-vis local people. Next. Okay, so this is a conclusion. I wanted to quote Salman Rushdie, who put it this way: the only people who see the whole picture are the ones who step out of the frame, who step outside the frame. So all of you at this conference are really stepping out of the frame of academic research, and I congratulate you for doing it. It's a struggle, maybe not so much even at the community level once people trust you. The struggle is going to be in the academic world, the formal market economy systems, which are really find difficulties with our approaches. But, you push on. If we are a social movement, we keep going, we unify. And I think ALTERSEA is one wonderful way in which many of us have been able to do it. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to connect with you in this manner. That's it.
Thank you very much, Professor Mary Racelis. I must say that it's a vintage Mary Racelis presentation, illuminating, engaged, and impassioned. So thank you very much. Thank you for elaborating on the concept of co-knowledge generation, including its tenets, co-creation, co-production, co-ownership, co-benefits, a process where disadvantaged communities, disadvantaged groups are at the center, and a process which is supported by NGOs, by faith-based groups, including academics like us. Speaking for myself as an academic, I especially appreciated, and I'm sure our audience members also did, I appreciated the questions you posed and the challenges you posed pertaining to the ethical dimensions that are involved when one tries to be an activist researcher. So I'm sure that your presentation has sparked a lot of questions and comments, which we will listen to later during the open forum. Uh, to our participants, I would just like to remind you that if you would like to raise a question during the question and answer segment, please type this in the chat box. No, put your full name and to whom you would like to address your question, comment, then type your question and comment. Now, I will read them out later during your Q&A. Um, so at this point, I would like to call on Professor Noreen Sapalo. Like me, she's a disciple of Mary, having been also a student of Mary. So let me now introduce um, Professor Nin Sapalo. Um, Professor Nin Sapalo is a social anthropologist doing engaged work with various Filipino communities. Her research which employs qualitative methods such as counter mapping and digital ethnography, reflects her interest in development and humanitarianism, urban anthropology, the anthropology of disaster and human rights, death studies, and the anthropology of affect and emotions. Neen finished her bachelor's degree in development studies at the University of the Philippines, Manila, and obtained her master's degree in anthropology at the University of the Philippines-Diliman. Her MA thesis, which I got a chance to read parts of, no, is a digital ethnography of death, grief, and mourning amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Currently, Professor Sapalo is an assistant professor at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, an affiliate faculty of the UPCSSP Folklore Studies Program, and a board member of the Ugnayang Pantao, which is the Anthropological Association of the Philippines. Let us welcome to the virtual floor Ms. Noreen Sapalo.
Hello, thanks very much, Dr. Marici. I hope you can hear me. Just call my
Yes,
attention.
we can. Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone from Manila, Philippines. I hope everybody is doing well. As a former student and lifelong mentee of Dr. Racelis, I'd like to preface my very short discussion with this. I fully agree with Prof. Mary's points, all of them. So what I'm going to do now is just add a little bit to her points earlier. So first, I'd like to emphasize our shared current political realities and contexts. Rodrigo Duterte's war on drugs in the Philippines, the electoral win of dictator Ferdinand Marcos Sr.'s son in the recent Philippine elections, the military dictatorship in Myanmar, identity politics in Indonesia, the frequent military coups in Thailand. All these present significant challenges for anyone who seeks to support civil society and promote human rights. And we all know how the COVID-19 pandemic has worsened inequality and state repression across Southeast Asia. In Myanmar, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, countries with poor health infrastructure, the pandemic has revealed the cracks in the system, highlighting the state's inability to provide for the basic needs of their citizens. In the Philippines, in particular, we've also seen how community or grassroots efforts to sustain and defend life during the pandemic was met with violence and state repression. The red tagging of community pantries, the red tagging of advocates, of activists, and academics alike continue until this very day. And social media makes red tagging and these attacks, as well as fake news and disinformation, travel faster than ever. And the trend here is that state agencies openly red tag activists and advocates online on their official Facebook accounts. And then a few weeks after, you'd learn that the red tagged advocate has been shot dead. So it's this culture of death, of impunity that prevails in the country, and it's made worse by social media. Because as you know, the Philippines is the world's social media capital for the seventh year in a row. So social media manipulation has become an endemic problem in the Philippines since it was first used for the presidential campaign of authoritarian leader Rodrigo Duterte in 2016. But the people's movement in the Philippines are pushing back. So yes, they utilize social media platforms like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram to fact check and even dispel myths about the Marcoses, for example. But most importantly, many grassroots organizations and scholars are taking up the task of going to communities, understanding what they call the moral politics of communities and their reception of fake news and disinformation. Because ultimately, they all believe that the war against disinformation will not be won solely online. So it is in these dire contexts that we try to do engaged scholarship. These realities underscore the fact that social or natural scientists need to do or practice their science with their feet on the ground. So in this critical juncture, there is no escaping state fascism and repression. So now I'd like to bring attention to efforts by scholars and scholar activists in the Philippines who have been on the front lines of combating disinformation, for example, and historical revisionism by the current president's family. So in May of this year, a group of Filipino scholars and academics has launched an online manifesto seeking the defense of historical truth and academic freedom. So they did this in the light of the expected victory of then presumptive President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and then presumptive Vice President Sara Duterte, the daughter of Rodrigo Duterte. So I'd like to quote from the manifesto. Um, they say there, the presumptive electoral victory of Marcos Jr. and Duterte signals an intensified struggle over historical knowledge and pedagogy, the erasure of traumatic, personal, and collective memories of plunder and human rights, violations under martial law, and unbridled myth-making about a so-called golden age presided over by the conjugal dictatorship of Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos. As scholars and academics, we oppose all forms of disinformation that rely on fabrication, manipulation, deceptive rebranding, and propaganda using social media and other digital and information technologies. We pledge to combat all attempts at historical revisionism that distort and falsify history to suit the dynastic interests of the Marcoses and their allies and to fortify their power. We vow to protect the integrity and independence of educational, historical, and cultural institutions. We staunchly defend the right to freedom of thought, inquiry, and expression. We oppose all forms of censorship and book banning. We condemn attempts at red tagging individuals, groups, and institutions. And the last paragraph reads, we resolutely commit ourselves to upholding academic freedom. We shall strive to promote academic initiatives to protect the memories of a most violent and traumatic period in the history of the Philippines from the continuing attempts by the Marcos family and their supporters to eradicate them, end of quote. So this manifesto gained much traction on social media and has gathered around more than 1,000 signatories as of press time. And the network has also spearheaded several activities with people outside the academy to forward the campaign. So efforts and shows of solidarities like the manifesto, I believe, exhibit the spirit of forging alternatives for and in the academy. And now the last point I'd like to make is more of, just like Professor Racelis, a call to action for fellow knowledge workers. I guess through the conference and through conversations made, we've acknowledged many times that scholars come from a position of privilege, and it's obviously very difficult to enable equal partnerships or equal footing in our situation. Mostly because academic structures often undermine engaged approaches and methods. However, we scholar activists need to resist the intricate workings of neoliberal academia. So we have to be ready to put in years of work, as Professor Racelis has shown us. Of course, she reminds us to always be patient, which is an absolute fundamental component of success in engaged scholarship. And at the global scale, however, one might ask, what does it mean for us to become scholars with serious political commitments? I think the important thing is, aside from, taking a stand, we need to be bold about our position in our politics and why we are taking up the initiative to challenge existing paradigms. And this also means trying to bring in contrasting narratives and revealing the problems, especially in the context of research. Of course, we need to contest the ways in which research is or has been used to reproduce structures of inequality and strive to put engaged scholarship in the very heart of our institutions and of our work. We would also need to cross disciplines to match voices different from our own, and even more importantly, all those outside of the academy. And we need to contribute actively to those kinds of solidarities. And among engaged scholar activists, I think we must create and support alternative platforms that will promote scholarships and solidarities that are independent and critical even of the global or transnational system, that speak truth to power and are reflective of the realities of the marginalized and the disadvantaged. And I think ALTERSEA and its many activities is proof that interests in alternative scholarship and even alternative paradigms exist. We just need to consolidate and coordinate our efforts. So to end, I'd like to share with you a slogan I love very much. I think Professor Mary told me about this when I was still a grad student, and I hope I can say this correctly because it's in okay. So it's soyez réaliste, demandez l'impossible. Let's be realistic. Let's demand the impossible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Nin Sapalo. That was an excellent rejoinder, response to the keynote address of Professor Mary. Um, Thank you for amplifying the points that Mary made and by bringing to the fore in your response current realities in the Philippines. Now, for example, the war on drugs by former President Rodrigo Duterte, the red tagging that is happening, COVID-19, social media manipulation, and the return of the Marcoses to power. At the same time, despite this alarming and even depressing reality, she gave us hope because she also reminded us that there is a pushback. The pushback comes from grassroots groups, particularly in their efforts to counter red tagging happening in social media. And also there's a pushback from academics like yourself who try to combat historical revisionism and social media manipulation. So thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Sapalo, Professor Sapalo. Uh, at this point, we will move to the open forum. Let me, and I invite everyone to post their, to raise questions. It can be on the, you can voice them verbally, but you can also type them on the chat box. Let me go over some of the comments that have been made. For example, Professor Catherine Shear shared this to everyone. She said that on data questions of ownership, because I think this is linked to the ethical issues in research that Mary spoke about in her talk. On data questions of ownership, an important contribution is by Rosa Castillo in a forum in the journal Social Anthropology. So you can find in the chat box the link, the hyperlink to the article of Dr. Professor Rosa Castillo. And there is a very positive note from ALTERSEA, and I'll read it. Dear Mary, based on your long experience, do you see a contemporary significant tendency in Southeast Asia toward the methodology you have just defended in academics research as well as NGOs intervention? Mary's response, I don't know if she would like to elaborate on it. She said that there is a new generation that is trying to do just that. Uh, and ALTERSEA is helping definitely. Um, uh, Professor Neen, there is a question for you. Is this network linked to Indonesian Kika by any means?
I'm not too sure about that, but I think the manifesto was also circulated among Southeast Asian scholars who work in or with Filipino scholars.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe Erlambang would like to develop around that because Erlambang is in charge of organization among concerned scholars across Southeast Asia, if I'm not wrong.
Okay, thank you.
Erlambang is joining us. Thank you, Gabrielle. Here we go. Gabrielle, could you rephrase your point to Erlambang, please?
Sure, I would just like to ask to Erlambang, what is the condition, the current condition of the International Solidarity Network in which you are committed and which aim to defend academic freedom all across Southeast Asia?
Yeah, thank you, Gabriel. What we are doing now in Indonesia actually keep spirit in bringing the message of academic freedom, and we expand also solidarity with other organizations and also network in Southeast Asia, especially through, of course, part of this ALTERSEA conference, SIHEN, and now we also collaborate with SAR, Scholars at Risk, because the tension for attacks getting bigger and more serious, and it's really fundamental for us. So that's why 2 months ago, I went to UN for reporting this formally at the UPR mechanism, Universal Periodic Review. And it will be next week, the session, we will be hearing what will be other states will respond to our concern in Indonesia as well as in the region. And also, it is good to know finally scholars from Netherlands also involved in promoting the issue of academic freedom. You can see from the winner last week, last 2 weeks, winner is the conference, collaborative conference between Indonesia and Netherlands. And also now is concern from Norway because finally we got support from Norway, I mean from academia, to be hand in hand in promoting in promoting academic freedom in bringing the message of universal issue like climate justice. So that's the things that I could share so far. And we are in Indonesian Caucus for Academic Freedom already establishing Surabaya principles on academic freedom, and also perhaps Joel, if he is here, also could share. Actually, these principles has been adopted by regional network of SIHAN, Southeast Asian Human Rights Studies Network. So that's all. Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you very much for your responses. I believe that Mr. Wijayanto has his hand raised. Sir, can you please address your questions or your comments to the body?
Okay, thank you, Marita. First of all, I would like to say thanks to Mari for your inspiring closing speech, and also encouraging and also motivating too. But I would like to raise a challenge, or maybe to warm up this closing session, whether the ideal things that Mary proposed is actually realistic or is just an utopia. For instance, a challenge to challenge the establishing norm right now to in the university ranking, to avoid the Scopus or other reputable international journals, because I think Herlambang just made it clear that he's now in Paris, and tomorrow he will go to the United Nations to report about the problems of academic freedoms. One of them is in Indonesia, and maybe also in other countries in Southeast Asia. And if we look at the situation in Indonesia right now, for instance, we will find the bureaucratization of university or higher education alongside with politicization, alongside with commercialization, and also feudalism there. So these problems that is threatening academic freedom is real. So I was wondering if whether or not and to what extent the proposal or the idea that Mary shares is realistic, even though at the same time, of course, we are happy to have a forum like ALTERSEA, or in Indonesia we have Kika, for instance, in which Erlambang is one of the founders. However, in reality or in general, the norms or the establishment, the regime still follows all of those themes that I mentioned: the commercialization, bureaucratization, politicization, as well as feudalization of higher education. And it's now I guess the norm here in Indonesia, at least, and it's seriously threatening the academic freedom. And I guess Nin also shared an insightful response to your speech. But I wonder if I can ask Nin about, you mentioned Nin about the social media propaganda in Philippines. So I wonder how and to what extent the social media propaganda contributed to the rise of Duterte and Marcos, yeah, and which is as I saw in Paris last June, it was a bad news for colleagues, yeah, from Philippines. To conclude, the situation of academic freedom is not separated, yeah, or to the social political context in general. So, and in Indonesia, what we see is democratic regression and tendency to authoritarianism. As a consequence, and the higher education as part of as the social political context also repressed, the academic freedom to some extent is also repressed by the regime. So that would be my points or my comments to Mary. So I'm not being pessimistic, but to 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 bring our discussion back to the earth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wijayanto, for your very incisive comments. I'd like to ask Mary and Neen to respond. Mary, in particular, so how do you respond to the point that what you were saying, especially how to work in an academic setting where, for example, some norms are intractable given the push for university worldwide rankings. No? So how do you push for co-knowledge generation and being activist researchers in a university setting? I was thinking, Mary, perhaps you could share some work you have done doing this. Now, recent researchers you have done where you had to grapple with some of the ethical issues in research, no? As you tried to push for co-knowledge generation. And then, Neen, I will ask you to respond later, about social media disinformation. So, Mary?
Yes, thank you. About with the first question, yes, certainly, these are when I'm talking about we should do this. These are huge things to tackle, but you have to start somewhere. And there are always people many who want change, and there are always people who have to figure out where can you get it? Where are the vulnerable sectors? Even in government, we've found that there are people in government who are oriented to our ways, but they're, one of a few in the government. But when you begin talking to them and they begin to see, then they talk to their friends who are more or less on their side. It's a long process. I agree with you. You have to be very patient. Social movements take a long time to build up. But often, so you just have to keep pushing where you can, keep the space open. Actually, that's something that Mr. Sujat Moko, when he was at a conference soon after he was first allowed out of the country to a group, an interdisciplinary group, we asked him, how do you keep up your energy given, that you've been in house arrest for so long? He said, you just have to keep the space open. They will keep trying to close the space and reorganize things. You have to keep pushing. Everybody in small ways, if you're many, and if you reach other people through networks, alliances, you can begin to become a significant force. But granted, it will take a long time, but it means actively mobilizing people to think, of the moral public is what, as somebody said. So I myself, I started this because I have been working with NGOs and POs, people's organizations, for so many years. And I'm so convinced that the dynamic social discussions were happening on the ground that I would listen to much more than in academia in many ways. Yeah. And so, you've got to have a passion. You have to be passionate about it, but not think that you know everything. Otherwise, your colleagues don't like that. You get marginalized. You have to be always pushing, not too much if you think that they're reacting negatively. You have to know how to negotiate it also. but you have to find solutions. If the paradigm is one thing, you try to develop a new paradigm. Just as a very minor example, let me say that when our university now was face-to-face again in class, and I said, good, now we can do field work again. And they said, oh, but you have to check, and we need, they have to have health certificates, the parents have to sign, and the university has an outreach office, and we have to know where the students are going to be. And I had connected them with many different communities, and they had some of their own. And so I said, you mean, I have to tell them where they're going to be, mostly Metro Manila, because, said the group that's in charge of university outreach, we have to talk to the local governments to be sure that they will approve. I said, the Quezon City government is going to have approve this my student. So I went to the department of the chair and said, look, let's reframe this. This is simply a term paper. It is not the community outreach of the university. Reframe it, because if it's community outreach of the university, then that office has to do what it has to do. This is just a term paper, which is community-based. Chair, please sign that it's a term paper. And she said, yes. And she said, let me check with the dean. The dean said, yeah, it's a term paper. We don't have to go through all of that. But if I hadn't raised it, then all the others who want to maybe do this would have had to go through the system if they didn't raise it. So what I'm saying is, when you see an opportunity to push, but it needs a framing so that the people in power can carry it on in ways which they understand they can convince their bosses, that can make a difference. And that's where we're, I think, talented. We know how to do that, how to frame things. Right? So that's just one example. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. So our takeaway there is, when there are openings, no matter how small, just keep
Thank you.
pushing, and mobilize.
Yes, thank you.
Organize.
Thank you,
Thank
Mary.
you.
And maybe if I share the optimism that Mary has, I will have a long life like Mary.
Yes.
People ask me, how come I'm so active at my age, which is 90? I said, because you have to have a passion about something that you defend and you care about. As long as you have good health, take a walk every day, eat well, then, but a passion is important because it gives you life.
Yep.
And connecting with young people, that keeps my passion going.
So that's Mary's elixir, having a passion for social justice
And optimism.
working with her students, and optimism, unbridled optimism. Thank you. Neen, would you like to respond to Mr. Wijayanta's comment earlier on
Yeah.
social media disinformation?
Thank you. Hi, Wija. Nice to meet you finally.
Yes.
Thanks for the question. As I shared earlier, social media manipulation has become an endemic problem in Philippine politics. We saw that during Duterte's reign, with him having troll farms, and I think most politicians, we're currently doing a study about disinformation peddled by content creators or influencers. And we've seen how local politicians, even those at the barangay level, sometimes they enlist trolls or they enlist social media managers. So social media has become really a great platform for politicians to win elections in the Philippines. And this is because of the conditions that enable the proliferation of falsehood and distortions. No? We have weak political institutions. There's this dwindling trust in the media, unregulated platform economy, among others. So scholars refer to the rise of the disinformation industry that instituted this political manipulation as a dominant logic in contemporary politics in our country. So we have several Filipino social scientists who have done work about influencers and their critical role in political influence operations, especially during election seasons. And I think we share the same realities with other countries in Southeast Asia or in Asia Pacific, with many influencers becoming cultural and political conduits. No, so usually the political manipulation work of content creators and influencers in the Philippines, it's characterized by nuance and grayness. They push the limits of the frame disinformation because they use memes. They tend to use pseudonymous accounts, or they exhibit what scholars call contrived authenticity, meaning they seem very relatable to people, so it's easy to resonate with them. Sometimes they deliver news like legitimate news anchors, which make, people believe in that format or in that genre faster. So interestingly, in the Philippines, influencers are among the most well paid in the hierarchy of um, propaganda and electoral work, with their salaries documented to range around 10,000 pesos a day to 250,000 pesos. No, that was in 2017. So you have Filipino scholars working on the supply side of this information that has been happening for the past 3 years, because that's definitely an important part of the equation. But I'm also happy to report that there are several social scientists immersing in communities, especially where Marcos Jr. has won. And they've been trying to understand from the perspective of the community why fake news or disinformative news tend to have currency to them, why the folklore and the myths about Marcos Jr. resonate with them. So the demand side or the receiving side of this information, Filipino social scientists are engaging and collaborating with community members to get to that, to get to the root of that problem. So while at the start, the social media thing tended to make people pessimistic with the technological determinism that came with it, because of engaged modes of collaboration that's been happening since last year, I think we'll be able to find solutions to that endemic problem or possible alternatives, like maybe the importance of citizen journalism, for example. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nina, for as always your insightful comments and responses. We have another comment on the chat box. It's actually a question. It pertains to the role of theory, a conceptual framework, no, when one does engage research. No? So I will read the question. Mary, the question is addressed to you, Professor Mary, to Mary, and it comes from Mr. Benjamin Velasco. To Mary, could you talk further on the question of co-methodology, given the asymmetry between the researcher and the community regarding theory? It seems to me that engaged researchers do bring a conceptual perspective before going into a community, but that framework may and can change as a result of interaction with the community, as a result of discourse, and in the light of the lived experience of research participants. Mary, can you please respond to Mr. Velasco's question?
Yeah, definitely. I think you make a very good point that we do have frameworks. We shouldn't be apologetic about that. It's how, whether we impose our frameworks or whether, as you suggest, that we come in with it, but we're always trying to find out more and trying to see how does the community see it. Let me just give a very quick example. There was a land management project supported by the World Bank and Australian aid in Leyte. And they're trying to get one system of land management and titles and so on. And so they had all these farmers who had access to land but didn't own it, but had a claim, etc. So they reduced the steps from 135 to 25, but the aim of the project, as defined by government and the World Bank and AUSAID, was that if they go through all of the steps, they will reach step 0, which is you can get a loan from the land bank of the government because you now have a firm title established. That was the framework. That was their version of success. All right. Turns out that in the process of all of this, of several years this is going on, they discovered that most people stopped at step 8, if they even got there, but they would stop at step 8. So they said, what's the matter with these people, etc., that kind of thing. And the two anthropologists, there was an Australian anthropologist woman and myself on that project. And we said, we'll find out about what's step 8. And when we did that, we discovered step 8 is when the land is already, it seems to be clear that this belongs to person, farmer A. And on this day, they're going to call all the farmer or owners or claimants of the surrounding land of the boundary and the local government and the land assistant and all the officials who need to be there. Because when everybody agrees what the boundaries are that is this farmer A's, then they will put the mohon. What's the mohon? The stone. What is the mohon in English? Where the marker stone that indicates that's legally that's his. All right, that's what happens at step 8. There are arguments because in one we saw one farmer saying, "Wait a minute, that's my property, but you can have it because it's too far from me, but you have to give me your side of it here." So they negotiated, and the government was there, the local mayor's office was there. Anyway, after they were all together, and after an hour or 2 or 3, they resolved the question, and the mohones were put down. And so then we said, "Oh, so now are you going to go to next step 7 and 6? And he said, "Why? I know this is my land and everybody has signed off on it. But what if you need money to invest in your farm?" He said, you think there's a land bank, how you won't have access. He said, no, we're not going to go to the land bank because the government, if you don't pay on time, they take your land. No, I will I will mortgage my land. There's a local system in the informal economy of mortgaging your land, and you can get different advantages depending on the person, whether it's the barrio captain or your relative. The terms of reference are tremendously complicated for us, but we looked into that. But as far as he knew how to do it in that system. So he didn't need step 7 up to 1 because he didn't want to deal with the land bank. He had a better way in his view. So we told the bank had said, "This project is a big failure." We said, "No, you have to change the paradigm. It's a big success from the farmer's point of view. He has the land. He can do what he wants with it. He can plant on it. If he wants to get a loan for it, he can go to someone whom he trusts, will not berate him if he's slightly late." So that's what I'm saying, that we have to, when I'm going very far from your question, but the methodology of coming in from the outside with our frameworks, we have to be humble enough not to impose it. I don't think most of us would, but to try and listen. And maybe they don't see it as frameworks. You have to sort of help them create it, or you create in your mind what you think the frameworks are just from being there, listening to the discussion. And then you can begin to see what are their frameworks, and you begin to discuss that with them. And that's what I'm talking about, is we need to build theory from the grounded evidence, and that will come from communities. We're not doing enough. We're still quoting, the American literature on this and how it adapts to the Philippines. No, it's time and it's going to be grounded evidence, and we have to help people formulate their framework, which are implicitly there, but we can help just by interacting over a long period of time. So that's my answer then to your question.
Thank you, Mary, for I think confirming what many of us feel and believe, that using theory in for example, alternative research, activist research, it's an iterative process. We can have a theory at the outset, but this is constantly challenged, and it can be reframed based on the reality that we encounter on the ground, and especially as informed by what we hear from the marginalized groups with whom we interact. Thank you very much for that. There is another question that I would like to read to the group. It's from ALTERSEA. Mary, did you meet the necessity? If you can look at your chat box, Mary,
Yeah.
I'll read the comment of ALTERSEA, of an ALTERSEA participant. Mary, did you meet the necessity to be critical toward a social practice or condition, such as internal injustice, gender inequality, and how did you address that to the community?
That's a very interesting question, because now I can bring in what I didn't really sufficiently do. usually I work with an NGO in that community. And they're there all the time, right? So they know this. So I can, I can say, all the land titles are in the name of the male. But what if he leaves? What chances does she have of claiming? And so we say, yeah, we didn't think about that. All right. So then they discuss it with the community. They talk to the women, they talk to the men, and they get solutions, or at least attempted solutions. So yeah, if there are critical practices, let's say how the children are are not fed this or that because it's seen as undesirable for some reason. And so you bring in a nutritionist and say, how we know that that child should have more of this, assuming they can afford to buy it, because often that's not the problem. That is the problem. But you work with them. It takes a lot, and the NGOs that work with them know them pretty well and know how to discuss this in focus group discussions. And up to a point, they can show them the data, but in the end, if they feel that's important, then more or less you have to back off. But you hope that in this case, the disadvantaged women, if they become aware, that this is really not necessarily entrenched in the biology of themselves, and that actually this is a socially constructed way of behaving, they themselves can begin to do it. And the community organizers can start working with them. And the women themselves know that they are not going to attack their own husbands or partners, so they know how to manage it. But it requires a lot of discussion. And that's why, and for me, I don't do that myself. I might point it out, because I saw in a survey, let's say, but I have to leave it to the organizers and the leaders. Once they've been leaders for a long time, they grasp some of these issues, and they figure out whether they should tackle it now and in what way. So connecting with someone who is either the local leaders who are, or for me, it's mainly the NGO that I work with very closely in those communities. That's it.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary, for reminding us about trusting in the innate capacities of our people, and especially if they're organized. Thank you. I think we're coming to the end of our open forum. I see no more questions on the chat box. At this point, I would like to invite Prof. Mary and Prof. Noreen just to say maybe one or two final points that they would like to leave with the participants to ponder on. So Mary and then Neen.
Well, let me go back to Mr. Sujat Moko's comment when we asked him that question. And he said, and these authoritarian leaders, they don't live forever. You just bide your time, keep working, keep the space open, and somehow, they will disappear into the distance and there will be a change. And I guess that's the thing with social movements. Just think of now, Iran, for example, a very repressive society, but there was a tipping point. And often we know that social movements, as long as you have been mobilizing their people who have common concerns, something that brings them together. The thing is, as social movement, if you're involved politically in it, you have to be sure that, well, you hope that you can organize it, that it doesn't get violent. But again, if the state is violent, that's another issue, right? But the tipping point, the social movements take a while, but they build up as long as at the base you are really adding and adding people who believe the same thing. And at some point, there will come a time when they say, this is it, this is the time. And that's my final statement. Patience, but determination and passion.
Thank you. We hope to see the day when illiberal democracies will be toppled and more genuine democracies be installed. We will see that happening in the next 2 years, because we're looking at many elections happening in the next 2 years. So thank you, Mary. Neen, we're very interested to listen to your final takeaway points.
Prof. Mary has said it all, but thanks again, Prof. Mary and Dr. Marita, for inviting me to react. to Professor Mary's keynote speech. I just really look forward to knowing Southeast Asian scholars and activists who have very serious political commitments and carry revolutionary optimism within them. That's it. Thank you.
So, in Filipino, we say, maraming salamat, thank you. To whom? To our speakers, of course, to Mary and to Neen, but also to all our participants for staying on at this time, even though, for example, in the Philippines, it's already 8:30 at night. Our session today was most enlightening, engaged, our word for tonight. And for me, no, my main takeaway is what Mary said, and also amplified by Neen, that we have to challenge and champion the validity. We have to champion the validity, strengths, and rights of affected people so that they can decide on their preferred modes of engagement in research and their involvement in the entire co-knowledge generation process. And we have to be aware of the responsibility of academics in this endeavor with local research partners. This might have to entail trying to push and push and push wherever openings we find so that we can reform academic university structures to be able to support co-knowledge generation modes. So on that challenge and with that fervent wish that we can make a dent in our structures, I bid you all good night and thank you. So this ends our session. Once again, thank you to our speakers, Prof. Mary and Professor Nin Sapalo, and to our audience members. Please stay on his Zoom link for the closing remarks of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Rita. And apologies for the French non-formality. We are not so used to add the titles in front of the names, but this is clearly not a sign of fact. On the contrary, this was a very important, meaningful closing talk, Mary. And I think what you have given us there, in addition of being a role model, I think, and as this very setup of the closing remarks with two of your students who are former students who have now become your peers, is really just showing the importance of people like you being in academia and the impact it has on which shape university is taking. So thank you so much to the three of you for your, so stimulating and encouraging, in addition of important in the sense that I think you have just put up a roadmap there, Mary, and I wish, universities were already a little closer to it. Vijay mentioned the utopian part or not. Let's hope that we are, with patience and passion, as you said, moving closer to a university landscape, both in Southeast Asia and elsewhere in the world, that looks a bit more than what you have outlined to us there. So I would just like to now start our closing of these 3 long and rich days. Thanking you all for having been with us. Thanking first of all the people who have shared their experiences, their thoughts, sometimes their doubts, presenters, moderators, participants. It has been extremely enriching to learn from all of you, as well as, and not least importantly, it has been very stimulating and encouraging to hear about all these different shapes and forms that engaged research is taking all across Southeast Asia and beyond Southeast Asia. So I think can express our respect to all of you. We would like to also thank, and this is on a more formal note maybe, but also a very important one, the numerous institutions and the people behind these institutions who have made this conference possible in a hybrid and multi-sited format. So once again, we apologize a little bit for the for the slightly funky timeline that has been starting days very early and ending them very late for people from Southeast Asia to the US who have been participating. But all of this wouldn't have been possible without Ateneo de Manila, who has been here with us now for this closing remarks, C Junction in Bangkok, the Southeast Asia Research Institute in Singapore, Shape C in Bangkok as well, LP3ES in Indonesia, Diponegoro in Semarang, Indonesia, also with us this morning with Vijaya's students, Kafoskai University in Venice, Mates Grid at Chulalongkorn in Bangkok, Thailand, the Center for Integrative and Development Studies at the University of the Philippines, the Centre Asie du Sud-Est here in Paris, and the School of Asian Studies as well. I'd also like to thank Clara Como and Doria Belash, whom you haven't seen, but who have been very much involved in putting up the website and doing all these numerous little things that are necessary for such a conference to function. And I mean, we were hesitant whether, we should even reflect again about what has been said over these 3 days, because Mary, you have already given us such a thoughtful and exhaustive reflection about this. But here are a couple of points that we have been retaining. The main purpose of the conference was to enable a dialogue between different sectors of society interested by the theme of social movements and more broadly of political projects alternative to those of the state and the corporate sector. In this sense, we are glad to have been hearing the voice of non-academic people from Myanmar, as in panel 5, coordinated by Jonathan Rhodes from the TLIP Center based in Chiang Mai, Thailand. The contributors exposed first-hand material and provided feedback on a peer-to-peer research. And this was the occasion to think about research as a process, to reflect upon how research and its social object transform each other, and finally to view the constitution of the research group as a training in itself through reciprocal or circulatory sharing of knowledge. In panel 1A on trajectories, we were offered the possibility to see how research can be instrumentalized and to be reminded of the importance to contextualize data. Serena Abdulrahman explained how her immersion in a fisherman community has progressively led her to be increasingly involved with this community, and she shared the numerous ethical questions and doubts as well she is still facing through her research as an activist scholar. Lisa Broughton and Swan Yetut reflected, so based both in the US, Swan being originally from Myanmar, both reflecting upon what their public role was in the context of research on Myanmar, calling for decolonization of academia in its most full meaning, so to say. And I will now hand it over to Gabrielle to continue with day 2.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. So I follow with the scientific argument and what can be wrapped up. So besides what has presented Catherine, the red threads running through the conference, some points of differentiation have emerged across the presentations and the discussions, like for instance, in which context is the participatory approach required, and in which other more classical and distant ways of approaching a subject are necessary. It has emerged that there is no straightforward answer to the methodological question of what is the stance to be adopted. Kin Ormar from Myanmar, in a brilliant opening keynote speech, has explained the multiple positions she has been led to adopt according to the fields and contexts, sometimes as an advocate, sometimes as a researcher. As underlined by Sardar Saadi this afternoon in the Transregional Roundtable, as well as underlined by Marie Racelis in her keynote address, we could also think how difficult it is to dissociate these two facets of the human commitment to research when our interlocutors in the field are confronted with vital issues and extreme situations of violence. And in some ways, we were led to consider that sometimes we are forced by the circumstances to backstep as an academic and to offer our assistance by other means instead. Overall, Kin Ormar and Marie Racelis explains that if we build trust in our interactions and explain to the people we work with what can be achieved together, most of the time they are very interested in co-constructing the research. And it also happens that people need outsiders as witnesses, amplifiers, and facilitators. For instance, to pass along information in a written, official format, to shift to national or international scales. It has been underlined by Birgit Müller. Therefore, we should not overlook the public responsibility endorsed by the academics and other researchers. Another point concerns the ambivalence involved in research methods, which often overlaps with ambivalence regarding the social facts themselves. Panel 4 stressed this ambivalence in ongoing social political trends with forms of personalizations, leading in some cases to stronger social cohesion, and in other cases to mechanisms of family accumulation embodied in dynastic politics, as it was presented by several panelists. Other ambivalence occurs to emerge with disposal for social regulations that can both lead to community protection as well as to forms of enclosure or sectarianism. Panel 3 on ethics and theory also reminded us that we need to be alert to dissidencies that may emerge from unexpected places or through unexpected ways, like it was described in the case of dissident Catholics in Vietnam, struggling against the capitalistic trends of the Communist Party elites. Other new trends were highlighted by the presenters of panel 1, with new spaces of contention and collaboration for LGBTQI+ struggles in the Philippines, Italian football supporter solidarities reappropriated by young women in Indonesia through creative, localized ways in terms of sisterhood, promotion of peaceful manifestation of sport passion, and enactment of horizontal ways for collective decision. It was a very interesting paper as well. I recommend you in the YouTube channel. Not only do we see the eruption of avant-garde activism, we also witness structural, cultural, profound, and long-term transformation. As underlined by Kin Omar in Keynote, there is an important difference between the situation in current-day Myanmar and in the 1980s. Today, the population knows what they don't want and what do they want. The sentiment of national cohesion should not be overestimated, but we can see a very significant transformation of the political horizons that opened up to Burmese people and that keep them passionate and with trust in their action. I pass the floor to Sarah to finalize this small note.
Thank you, Gabriel. New forms of solidarity, whether local or transnational, enable people to provide new meanings to their struggles. In panels 2 and 3, our colleagues have shown how the struggles both unveiled systemic dysfunctions, like patronage politics, and allowed to address the personal activation of some mechanism of these dysfunctions. By naming the problems, we are invited to imagine new forms of organization to face them, like, for instance, through the constitution of anti-corruption schools in Indonesia that unveil the weight of corruption on poverty and income, or the creation of strong solidarity networks among scholars to struggle for academic freedom. The increase of porosities between different sectors of society, like academia, advocate circles, professional practitioners, and the populations, are often a result of liberal trends that provoke material insecurity and social enemy. But these porosities also provide new avenues for collaboration and sometimes fertile crossbreedings. Finally, we should not only see these processes as commending further fragmentation between producers of knowledge, but also as giving rise to stronger collective consciousness of a common destiny as concerned citizens. Finally, the roundtable today was the opportunity for an interregional conversation to consider cross-sectoral approaches of social movements beyond Southeast Asia. Thanks to the insights of researchers working in regions as varied as the Middle East, Latin America, Europe, and mainland Southeast Asia, We could see that issues in researching social movements share common aspects anywhere in the world. Among them, security risks, such as the challenges posed by being placed within a violent situation and the urgency of doing something. What? The shifting and sometimes uncomfortable positions one can adopt and how this can transform in time, building trust with people we work with. The need to speak with people instead of speaking for them. The ability and relevancy to write when researchers are caught in internal conflicts and power relationships. How engagement can be informed by academic background and how academic discourse can help activists and citizens to develop stronger voices, etc. Researchers appear as witnesses, while in many parts of the world they also share urgent need for solidarity and freedom within the academic field. The struggle continues. Coming quickly back to academic consideration, as we are closing the second ALTERSEA conference, we would also like to invite you to reflect on the possibility of publishing your work, as the conference was held in collaboration with the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies this year. So, if you're interested in publishing in some way or another about reflections led during this conference, be it individually or collectively, please inform us by email. And now the last announcements. As most of us took up new positions this year, we decided to maintain the conference on a biennial basis. This means that the third ALTERSEA conference will be held in 2024. It will focus on the different scales of alter politics in Southeast Asia, and we hope that it will continue to contribute to a dynamic reframing of research and activism. In between, we invite you to remain engaged with ALTERSEA through webinars we'll be continue to organize together with our partners on a trimestral basis. This will be announced on our website and social media. Again, we hope that this conference was the opportunity for us, for you, to share, to listen, and to learn from other experiences, researchers, and findings. May it also be a chance to raise and foster more exchanges and solidarity, as we are not ivory tower scholars, as Rosa Castillo mentioned today. Quoting Mary, patience, determination, and patience. Let's step outside the frame together. Thank you.